Speaking of things that we like, Michael, what composers have influenced your writing the most?
Well, first I have to say that I only began writing 3 years ago.
Right.
So I had a good 60 odd years of listening to music of all kinds. But I think the greatest influence on me as a person, as a musician, is nature, birdsong. Birdsong is my very favorite music, and it fascinates me. And you hear the conversation of the birds. I mean, obviously any musician's influenced by Ravel as an orchestrator, for example. And I would say French composers, the neoclassic tendency, but I'm also very influenced by the British composers. When I was, I think, 8 years old, I went to the public library and I borrowed a recording of the Vaughan Williams Eighth Symphony, and I thought, I know this music. I don't know how I knew it. And it represents for me a world that I never knew. Maybe it never even existed, but a nostalgic, imaginary world that resonated with me as a child, and I kept that with me my whole life. So when I started to write music, it turned out quite differently than I thought it would. Apparently there's a voice. People say, yes, I recognize your voice in the music, but it wasn't the voice I thought I would have. But
What did you think you would have?
I thought it'd be more beautiful.
It is beautiful.
But I just imagined something else. But there's something about writing music that you're simply compelled to write what you write. And the first piece that was performed was a string quartet played by a quartet here in Korea. And the first violinist, a very dear friend of many of us here, Kajin Lim, said, Michael, do you really want an A flat there? And I thought, actually I do. And I thought I would say, play whatever you like. I'm happy. But I did seem to have some definite idea about what I was doing, right or wrong. And the other thing I learned in the process was all the mistakes I make as a composer, I would catch in a recording session, which is my primary work. And I would be, probably saying to my wife sitting next to me, oh, why did you write that? That's terrible. That's a mistake. Unprepared modulation, D. And I find myself writing so many unprepared modulations, and I love them. So I was talking to a very fine composer, Nicolas Bacri. He's a French composer. His music I love. And Nicolas said, of course, it's a different part of your brain. He said the composing part of your brain comes from someplace else, and the composing part of your brain will allow you to make any mistake that you like because you like it. You think it's musical, you think it's beautiful, you think it's what you want to say.
Nature seems to influence your writing quite a bit because the string quartet that you were just speaking of, the first movement is called Dutch Weather.
Dutch Weather.
Is that right? And then it goes on to Meadow and other.
Meadow, yes.
And then the piece that you wrote for me is called Skipping Stones. So does the imagery of nature come to you first, or is it because of what's surrounding you that it inspires you to write the piece?
The funny thing is I never believed in anything other than absolute music. The idea that music could evoke an image that was non-musical kind of bothered me. And then I found myself writing music that, for me, evoked memories. And the memory for your piece, Alice, was an unimaginably beautiful summer day before my hair turned gray. Well, on the side of a lake, just skipping flat stones and just watching them skip, and a sense of time stopping for that moment. And when time literally stopped for me on a broken down train in the Netherlands, and my telephone, my computer all ran out of battery, I had some paper in the back, and I drew music stabs, and I started to write the piece. And that's what happened. And at that point, I was just doing it as a kind of experiment to see, could I do this? And the piece turned out reasonably well, I think. I tend to write quickly, and the pieces tend to be short. And maybe it's because I don't have time, or I don't trust myself to as your dear husband says, to linger on moments. I tend to just get on with it because I never like note spinning. I mean, in composition in general, you say it once and you've said it, but I'm trying to force myself now to be more extended in the way I write.
You have many lives because you're a producer, a clarinetist, a composer.
They all inform each other.
Right. How so?
I think that, for example, when I work as an artistic director of an orchestra, if I hadn't played in an orchestra, it would be very difficult to have complete sympathy with what the musician's life is. Many administrators who have never had the experience have a difficult time in dealing with the real needs, desires, and problems that orchestra musicians have. I've conducted, which gives me the other side of the picture. When you stand there having played, you know that at least 10% of the people think you're a complete idiot. 5% say I could do this much better, and the others don't really give a damn. The recording production is completely different because in a funny way, you study a score in a very different way than a conductor does. I mean, you know the details in a different way, you're listening for different things, and you are the ideal audience. You're the one person who is the audience for the performer, and your job is to give back information that will help nurture their performance, create a comfortable environment. I've produced a lot of composers' first recordings, second recordings. Now I know how miserable they feel when they're sitting next to a critical me. And I always say, as a recording producer, we don't make a lot of friends because we never tell people what is good. We don't need to. I mean, sometimes we do. We just tell people what needs to be fixed. So composing for me completes the circle. I'm still learning so much about it, but now when I look at a score as a recording producer, I see it very differently. And if I do conduct, which happens several times a year, hopefully, I also look at scores in a very different way. I hear music differently because I'm writing music.
Do you think that you've wanted to compose for a while and maybe put it off, or do you think that it came about at the right time in your life, that you were ready for it when it came about?
Well, that's always true. I think the latter. Well, you're ready for it, but I probably wanted to do it for a long time, but never felt I had the requisite knowledge, tools, or sensibilities to do it. I could have done it at any point, but it came at a moment in my life when it had to happen. Mm-hmm. And in a funny way, you write music not for yourself. You write it for the people whose performances inspire your thoughts. I mean, for example, the first time I heard you play was I was sitting behind you in the Tchaikovsky violin concerto playing second clarinet, and your husband was the soloist, and I didn't know who you were from, and you didn't know me, but something I normally wouldn't even do, it's bad etiquette. I leaned over when you played a phrase I really loved and said, "That was really beautiful." And I think people looked at me like, "Hey, who are you? Shut up." But it was a spontaneous sort of thing, and that sound really stayed with me. And then you sort of imagine your sound, that sound, doing different things, mm-hmm. maybe things that didn't exist before. And I really find that, I said nature, but to be very, very honest, almost everything I've written, there is someone's sound in my head, and it just... Your sound is an extension of your voice, so how can I write for your voice? So it's a sort of an imagination of how I think you could sound in a certain piece, or let's try this. It shouldn't be this mysterious. I'm sure that for people that have been doing it longer, that do this professionally, they understand the process better. But yeah, that's the evolution of it, will be an image and a musician. And somehow that synergy works for me. And when I'm actually writing, I generally can kind of hear that person's sound in my head if it's a soloist.